was William Blake's dictum, wisdom through excess. And there's also ideas that are reflected in the Gospels too, that there's more treasure in some spiritual sense heaped up by those who dare to sin and then repent and are reclaimed than those who are too terrified to take any action whatsoever on the off chance that they might make a mistake. Christ says the same thing in Revelation when he comes back as a judge. He says that his harshest judgment isn't reserved for those who are hot or those who are cold, so the good or the evil for that matter, but for those who play both ends against the middle and sit and never commit. And that's really an interesting idea, right? Is that in some real sense, God, at least how God's represented in the Old Testament, is definitely the spirit on the side of the adventurous, for better or for worse. And that's quite something, right? Because it also, I think, bears some sheds some light on this notion of the terrifying element of the transcendent. It's not, whatever God's goodness is, it's not some simple, harmless, like all-encompassing, weak compassion. It's something terrifying in its moral breadth, because it would really be something if the Spirit of God is on the side of the rampantly adventurous. And I think you can make a strong case for that, at least from within the confines of the biblical corpus. I mean, Abraham's an adventurer, Moses is an adventurer, Noah's an adventurer. These are people David's an adventurer. They aren't people who stayed home and tried to never cause any trouble, right? Which is a kind of emasculation in and of itself.
Well, faith is a venture. It's entrepreneurial. I think people of faith, I call it the entrepreneurs of life.
And so why make the entrepreneurial connection?
Well, there's a vision, there's a venture, there's a risk, there's a cost. You know, the whole thing is wrapped up with that.
Well, I think that's lovely to tie that in with faith too, because in our culture, people often denigrate faith as belief in the unbelievable, as if it's first of all purely propositional, and second of all, it's just a denial of evidence. You see that in the atheist crowds constantly. But to me, faith is something like the willingness to take a risk based on a presumption. And maybe the presumption is, well, truth will set you free. It's like, well, tell the truth and see what happens. It's going to get you in a lot of trouble. The evidence that aggregates around you if you tell the truth to the degree that you can isn't that this is going to be the easy path forward. You have to decide. This is something Kierkegaard stressed, right? Is that you have to decide certain things as preconditions for action, independent in some real sense of the evidence. And that's the faith. And this is when Abraham, for example, in his great adventure, he follows God's call out of the safety of the tent. The faith is to heed the call of adventure, even though he's got everything in some sense that you'd need if you're only interested in hedonistic gratification. But there's something beyond that, and it's faith that allows you to make those decisions to step into the unknown future. You might ask, why do you grow when you go somewhere new? And there's two answers to that. One is you go there and you gather more information, you talk to new people, you see new things. And so you can think about that as a constructivist response, right? Your web of knowledge, adaptive knowledge increases because you've been more places. But that's not all that happens. If you go somewhere new and you expose yourself to a challenge, then new genes, the genes that haven't turned on to encode certain proteins turn on, and they flesh out your psychophysiological structure. And you could even imagine that you decided to take on a new challenge voluntarily. So that'd be part of the heroic journey. Then your biology is going to respond to that right down to the genetic level. And it's going to reveal new potential that's coded inside the genetic structure that's going to make you literally more than you are. And there's this idea that Jung talked about in relationship to the maze in the Chartres Cathedral. So imagine you go into this maze, and then you walk the 4 quadrants, and then you come to the center. And the 4 quadrants are the 4 corners of the world. And you have to pass through all the 4 corners of the world before you come to the center. And the idea there is that you have to hit yourself against all the sharp edges of the world before the full potential of what you are is manifest. And that has something to do, I would say, also with the idea of the harrowing of hell, is that you have to face death, and you have to face tyranny, and you have to face malevolence, and so that's hell at that point. And the deeper you peer into that abyss, and more strenuously you wrestle with that, the more of you turns on. And I think that's how, and then you also think, well, how could it be any other way? Why would what was within you manifest itself fully in the absence of challenge? Nothing works that way. You don't get stronger without lifting weights.
So then that leads to another question. How many people, putting aside an easy society, how many people lead a life devoid of challenges?
Well,
pretty small. They just don't acknowledge them as challenges, and therefore don't need to pass the test.
Well, or they're resentful and bitter about their problems
That's
instead
right.
of seeing them as adventures and opportunities.
That's the age we live in.
Yeah.
If I'm challenged, it's the fault of someone.
Yeah, well, and people are enticed to believe that. But what I've been so heartened by, and one of the things that people have been responding to in relationship to what I've been lecturing about as a clinician, I would say, is when you confront young people, this has especially been true of young men, with the notion that what they should do is strive to bear up underneath the heaviest responsibility they can shoulder voluntarily. They're unbelievably receptive to that idea. And it's so interesting to watch, because it's almost as if all you have to do is introduce the idea, assuming you're vaguely credible. All you have to do is introduce the idea, and it's like a crystal in a supersaturated solution. It just goes, no one ever told me that. And one of the things that's been deeply sorrowful for me is to see how much effect those ideas have on people, how quickly. And the reason it's sorrowful is because you simultaneously see how much of a lack there is of that idea in our current culture. So, but I think people are there for the call, man, and lots of them, especially young people on that sort of cusp of messianic development in late adolescence, you know, when the radicals can get a hold of them and make them resentful and bitter. If you offer a better pathway forward, which is something like bear up voluntarily under the catastrophe of life because you have something to offer, right? There's this idea, in the biblical idea, that in some sense, God says this, I think he says it to Moses later, that maybe it's in the Gospels, that it's required that all of the ramifications of the law manifest themselves. It's like a holy requirement. And the idea there is something like, and this is a really terrifying metaphysical idea. It's like, why is there suffering in the world? Why is there malevolence in the world? Well, maybe it's because we're not all we could be. And maybe it's incumbent on each of us, and I really mean each of us, to reveal everything that is within us. And if we revealed everything that was within us, and that would happen as a consequence of this voluntary ethical striving, if we revealed everything within us, God only knows how much hell we could dispense with. Because we have no idea what things could be like if everyone was 100% aiming up.